Okay, good. So whenever you're done, if you just switch things with the other here. Okay. And if I forget, what will happen? Oh, good, good. Mark will know what to do. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so
Yeah, you can just,
yeah, so I had the box slid over just a little bit for my notes,
Oh, it's-
and but I just didn't know if he was going to be reading the actual slides
No.
himself. So yeah, good.
There's a height differential here.
Oh, I see. Do you want me to raise it?
Exactly, exactly. And then that way you're ready. And then it's just a matter of hitting this right here. So it'll be up for Mr. Tall Guy. over
Does he know about that, or should I do it?
there. Yeah, because he won't remember. They never do.
Okay,
All right, you good?
I'm good.
Okay.
okay. Oh, okay. You can make it higher if you want.
Just right under the clock.
Come here.
Oh, that's one. Okay, beautiful.
I know, you think? I'll stand on my feet.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to special Ethics for Lunch. This is sponsored by both the Johns Hopkins Ethics Committee and the Berman Institute of Bioethics. Some of you are regulars to our Ethics for Lunch, but this month's is special because it's the annual Shallenberger Lecture, and I'll tell you about that in a second. Just to let you know that this is being recorded and we have live stream for people, so welcome to those online as well. Tell you about the Reverend Clyde Shallenberger. Began his service to the Johns Hopkins community in 1963 when he arrived as director of the Johns Hopkins Hospital's Chaplaincy Center, a pastoral care service that for many patients would become as important as the expert medical care they would receive. During his 30 years of service, he was there for thousands of patients, supporting them at times of personal crises and helping them through times of disease, sickness, and injury. Along the way, he also ensured that the caregivers had someone to turn to for comfort and support, and many faculty, administrators, and staff turned to him often. He retired from the chaplaincy in 1993, but continued as a member of the Johns Hopkins Hospital Ethics Committee and Consultation Service. He helped to establish the Ethics Committee in 1985. And prior to 1985, he was active on a hospital committee that he had initiated and had called the God Squad, helping patients, families, and caregivers deal with difficult ethical issues such as end of life. The annual Shallenberger Lecture is given by a visiting ethicist and sponsored by the Ethics Committee every April in his honor. The first Shallenberger Lecture was given in 1994. Clyde Shallenberger died in December 2020, and his wife, Helen, was also a devoted sponsor of this event, a supporter of the Shallenberger Lecturer. She died in 2021. They are, today with us in spirit, and through their children. We have Rick, his son, and Nancy and Karen, his daughters, and then other family and friends are also online. So we appreciate their continued support, and thank you all for joining us today. And I'm going to have Cinda Rushton, our other co-chair of the committee, introduce our speaker.
Thanks, Mark, and welcome everyone, and especially our Shallenberger family, who we have been together through many of these lectures, and just appreciate that incredible support. And I know Clyde would be thrilled to be here today, especially because our speaker today, I think, bridges many of the areas that Clyde cared about. So we are delighted to have as our Shallenberger lecturer this year, Patrick Smith. Dr. Smith is an associate research professor of theological ethics and bioethics at Duke University Divinity School. He's also a senior fellow in the Keenan Institute of Ethics and the director of the bioethics program at the Trent Center for Bioethics, Humanities, and History of Medicine at Duke Medical School. Dr. Smith is the president-elect of the American Society of Bioethics and Humanities and associate editor of the American Journal of Bioethics, and is a member of the Hastings Center Fellows Council and is a fellow of the Hastings Center. Patrick is a incredible scholar and brings just wisdom from many traditions into his work. Before coming to Duke, he was a lecturer at Harvard Medical School in the Department of Global Health and Social Medicine. He also served as faculty for the Masters of Bioethics program that was offered through Harvard Center for Bioethics. He also worked professionally for 8 years as the ethics coordinator for the Angela Hospice Center in Livonia, Michigan, during which he served on the Ethics Advisory Council for the National Hospice and Palliative Care Organization, and is a board member for the Hospice Palliative Care Association of Michigan. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Patrick Smith.
No, my mic. All right, great. Now you all can hear me. That's wonderful. So thank you so much, Dr. Rushton, for that introduction. Oops, sorry, it feels like it's a little. All right, great. It's a real pleasure to be here, to be part of this very prestigious lectureship in honor of Reverend Clyde Shallenberger. And also, I'm just really grateful for his commitment and dedication to promoting spirituality and ethics for more than 30 years. And that legacy continues to shape this space here, and it's very evident from the 2 days that I've been here interacting with many of the staff and faculty in this space. Also, it was a pleasure for me to meet just a few moments ago the children of Dr. Clyde Shallenberger, Nancy, Rick, and Karen. And so I just want to thank you and your family for your ongoing support of this lectureship and the work that's going on in this space. That was really curated by the work of your father and also through your family, right? Because we know that our families are in this space as well. Also very much grateful for the co-sponsorship with the Berman Institute as well as the Johns Hopkins Hospital Ethics Committee. So the co-chairs here as well, Dr. Mark Hughes and Dr. Cinda Rushton, for their hospitality, and many members of the ethics committee that I've had an opportunity to connect with, and the chaplain service here in this space. Really grateful for the way you've received me and welcomed me in. Also, the Berman Institute, I have deep respect for and very high regard for its footprint in the field of bioethics. I think the Berman Institute won the Cornerstone, ASBH Cornerstone Award in 2023, if I'm not mistaken, which is the highest honor that the organization, the society gives to an organization. So again, as a testament to the good work that has been taking place in this space for many years. And so really, really grateful for the sponsorship of those two spaces here. And also just want to take a moment to thank Sharon Broda and Anna Edelman as well for their administrative help and support and assistance. So unfortunately, there are times where trying to catch me, maybe like trying to catch the wind, but eventually things will settle in and get set up. So really grateful to be here. Now, I must begin by saying right at the front here that I am not a musician, although I played at a saxophone during my teenage years, nor am I a jazz historian or a teacher of music theory. I'm just someone trained in moral philosophy and religious social ethics, working in the field of bioethics who loves music, in particular jazz, and loves hanging around artists as they engage in their craft. Excuse me one second here. And I'm one who is found in jazz, understood as more than music, resources that I believe can help shape the ethical life. Now, I'm not foolish enough to believe that everyone is here because they like jazz music. Of course, I think you are here to support the work of Shallenberger and the work going on in these spaces here. And I also suspect that some of you may be here because you're wondering what kind of Jedi mind trick I may be trying to pull off by bringing some of these ideas and conversation together. Now, I don't think one has to like jazz music to appreciate what some of these motifs we find in jazz, understood as more than music, can contribute to our thinking about the moral practice of medicine and to movements for health justice. Now, given that there are so many more experienced musicians and artists in this room and online who know so much more about these themes that I try to highlight this afternoon in my reflections, I want to save a little time for us to be able to riff off of one another regarding some of these ideas so that it can be generative for shaping the work that we do. Now, those of us who may have some awareness of jazz performance may see the vibrant and seemingly joyful appearance of artists and the relaxed settings people often inhabit during these performances as conveying a deep sense of joy and freedom, perhaps rightfully so. Maybe there are images conjured up of a laid back, relaxed, chilled out, and cool cats jamming on instruments and creating experiences of catharsis for all those participating when they find the groove, so to speak. Some of us may have an added stereotype of some musician who is able to have an entire conversation with us while holding a lit cigarette between his lips without ever taking it out, right? I don't know. The outward appearances of joy and deep ecstatic experiences that some may have when engaging this music could possibly obscure important features about jazz, again, understood as more than music. To appreciate this, I think it is important to remember jazz as a distinctively African-American generated musical art form with worldwide impact coming together around the turn of the 20th century. I want to suggest that awareness of the socio-political and historical context of where jazz came from is important to note to understand how jazz can inform the ethical life. Its birthplace is said to be in New Orleans. Early accounts describe how the Spanish, who let their Catholicized slaves have Sundays off, would gather in Congo Square. And Congo Square is the southern part of Armstrong Park in New Orleans and played a central role in the development of jazz. And so here, these enslaved people of the 19th century would play African music characterized by accented offbeat rhythms that would become a fundamental feature to the development of this music that would be called jazz. The music contained elements of slave songs, the spirituals, bent blue notes, and African drum rhythms, along with many other features. Award-winning music historian Ted Gioia brings all of this together when he writes these words. He says, no urban area on the planet offered a more diverse cultural mix during the years leading up to the emergence of jazz than New Orleans. New Orleans was the melting pot within the larger melting pot of American life. And when vibrant cultural traditions are forced into such close interaction and exposed to so many disparate influences, exciting new hybrids invariably emerge from the mix. In this instance, the result was jazz, a distinctive performance style created by Black Americans who drew on and added to the extraordinary musical ecosystem of turn-of-the-century New Orleans. When we listen to the ways New Millennium Jazz mixes effortlessly with Latin and Caribbean currents or with the formal structures of Western classical music, we're experiencing a continuum of the cultural dialogue that presided over the idiom's birth. Now, it was around the time when jazz emerged on the scene that New Orleans was also considered one of the unhealthiest cities in the United States. The yellow fever epidemic raged through the city in 1878. Black infant mortality in the city at the time was 45%, and the typical lifespan of an African American was only 36 years. All cities, of course, had to deal with public health risk, but New Orleans was especially dangerous, according to many historians of the time, because of its particular mix of well-traveled residents, climate, population density, and poor local sanitation. And so one cannot forget the deep racial discrimination, social injustices, and economic exploitation that was being experienced by African American people at this time. Now, of course, there were also many from other ethnic backgrounds experiencing various forms of discrimination and exploitation and poverty in that context. And this is very important for us to know, to get a sense of this New Orleans context. And so jazz vocalist Ruth Naomi Floyd can say without hyperbole that jazz is the art form born of oppression and pain. And this, I would suggest, is crucial to keep in mind when thinking about jazz as more than music and reflecting on it for the ethical life. Like many of you, I think there's something powerful about the musical arts and in all of the arts in general. And I think there is something interesting about jazz being, as some would call it, an imperfect art. Following those working in aesthetic philosophy, we can think about jazz being an imperfect art in contrast with other forms of art. As will be stated in just a few minutes, the very nature of jazz demands a kind of spontaneity within parameters. And so often improvised art is considered to be a kind of second-rate art, as art which is necessarily less worthy of our attention than that which is the result of careful planning all the way through from beginning to end. And so many of the virtues that those working in aesthetics sometimes search for in other forms of art, things such as premeditated design, balance between form and content, and overall symmetry, are often said to be absent in jazz, or maybe at least not represented in the same degree in the same ways. And so the question that is before us is, can the imperfect art of jazz stand alongside other forms of art such as poetry, painting, and the literary arts in the realm of aesthetic beauty? Now, it probably comes at no surprise to you that I would say, yes, I think so. And I do follow the judgment here of another music historian when he writes, clearly, any set of aesthetic standards which seek perfection or near perfection in the work of art will find little to praise in jazz. Yet this approach, however prevalent, is not the only valid way of evaluating works of art. A contrasting, if not complementary attitude looks at the art in isolation, but in relation to the artist who created it. It asks whether that work is expressive of the artist, whether it reflects their own unique and incommensurable perspective on their art, whether it makes a statement without which the world would be in some small way a lesser place. This, I believe, is precisely the attitude towards art that delights in jazz. Now, of course, those of you who are familiar with these conversations in other areas will recognize that this orientation is at odds with certain kind of Enlightenment ways of thinking about the notions of beauty and art. Nevertheless, though, maybe, just maybe, we can still draw some reflections from this imperfect art that is generated by imperfect people navigating an imperfect world for the imperfect practice of medicine. So what beats can we hit to create rhythms in the moral practice of medicine that are marked by attention to equity in healthcare and our encounters? Though there are many ways this can be done, I want to briefly just highlight 3 themes for us to reflect upon as we go into hopefully some conversation in just a bit. The first motif I want to highlight is this notion of syncopation. Syncopation is being aware of the main beats and the off beats. You accent that which was always there but has not been fully heard. The idea I want to raise here regarding syncopation is the emphasis on finding the beat on the offbeat, accenting rhythms that run within or sometimes even counter to the dominant momentum of an institution to uncover or reveal a rhythm that was otherwise hidden. Of course, other forms of music use syncopation, but as others have said, jazz is syncopation gone mad, right? The idea is closely related to the idea of swing. Jazz swings. That is, it picks up momentum and it presses forward and it searches for that which is to come. And swing is often considered that basic unit of rhythm. So it is this idea of being aware of the main beats and the off beats. You accent again that which has always been there, but not fully heard. Learning the art of syncopation makes us much more aware of the moments that we're in. Syncopation helps us to notice the unnoticed, perhaps. Given the breadth of existing documentation regarding things like healthcare disparities or healthcare quality, access and disparities, it is worth noting that many patients who are part of marginalized groups often do not have access to and receive the same quality of healthcare, often, though not always, due to structural elements with regard to our healthcare systems. Moreover, these dimensions of the problem go beyond questions of class or socioeconomic status and recognize that there are all types of ways that this converge to marginalize people from various groups. I want to argue that healthcare providers, ethicists, sociologists, chaplains, and others working in various spaces can arrive at a sense of respect for patients and move towards quality healthcare when we all are able to take seriously the experiences and the voices of those most marginalized by structural inequalities. So this notion of syncopation becomes a very important notion that shapes our thinking and our outlook. The application of syncopation extends beyond these interpersonal encounters to how the history of work in medical ethics, say, and more broadly bioethics, is told to us. So in our recounting the history of medical ethics, we need to have the ability to identify those people, those movements, and those issues that have not been part of the kind of the dominant narrative of the telling of the story. I just want to say that I think an undertaking has been done in this vein by medical historian Dr. Robert Baker in his most recent book, Making Modern Medical Ethics, and brace yourself for this long subtitle here that I was teasing him about, how African Americans, anti-Nazis, bureaucrats, feminists, veterans, and whistleblowing moralists created bioethics. And yes, that's actually on the book's cover too, right? So it's quite fascinating how they're able to fit it all in, right? Baker, in this work, gives a counter narrative on first-hand historical research of primary documents and careful analyses of socio-historical context of what some have considered the birth of bioethics. The traditional account underscores how the rise of medical technologies towards the end of the 20th century, such as the dialysis machine and ventilators, created the need to reassess common approaches to medical ethics in use at the time. In this work, Baker foregrounds overlooked stories and actions of those people who, and movements that, confronted unethical treatment of people in medicine. So here again, syncopation is being aware of the main beats, yes, and the offbeats. We accent that which was always there, but perhaps has not been fully heard. The second motif from jazz I want to highlight for our consideration is that of improvisation. This is probably one of the familiar themes to many of us. Improv, or as some would say, infinite play, is the infinite possibility of creative solution and generosity of work, and what that has to say about hope and moving forward towards what we cannot yet see. Other forms of music may employ improvisation, but in jazz, improvisation is expected, or at least in some, I would say, certain forms of jazz that you'll see this as being very much expected. If there is no improvisation, some would say that there is no jazz. To compose in the moment can be a very risky enterprise, and yet it is a necessary condition of the genre. Improvisation is that which allows jazz to exist in this continual state of renewal. And so there is a kind of freshness to the music. Improvisation is often seen as an essential, if not the essential characteristic of this music. And so it is improvisation that makes the playing of the same old song, so to speak, seem like a new song every time it is played and every time it is performed, because it is a music of traditions and of freedoms. The idea that jazz is a music of both traditions and freedoms, I want to stress, is important to keep in mind. As one ethicist has noted, improvisation is the willingness to live within the bounds of the past, yes, yet to search for the future at the same time. Improvisation is the desire to make something new out of something old. It is the craving to respect tradition while at the same time leaving one's own mark. Improvisation is having a plan and yet not being incarcerated by the plan. It is experienced in being open to letting the people around you, whether they are in the band or spectators in the audience, to have input into and impact on what you are creating. Let's think about that for a moment. Improvisation is about being so familiar with one's, say, instrument of choice, the song, and the essentials that we can trust ourselves, right, to search for the unseen, for what the moment may be presenting to us. So a deep attention to the present moment that we're in by being familiar with that which has come before us. The training healthcare providers receive and trainees are receiving is of utmost importance, as all of you know. Medical professionals are intimately familiar, or ought to be, with the relevant biological sciences important for their specialties. They are ingrained with the essential tools that can help diagnose and treat or engage in relevant kinds of medical research to address all sorts of health challenges. It is this deep familiarity with the relevant medical science and the judgments that have been shaped and formed and cultivated in seeing patients over a course of a career that allows for the kind of trust to search for creative ways in moments of uncertainty. It is creativity within the bounds of tradition, and sometimes extending beyond the bounds of that tradition when necessary. So the same can be said of those doing work, I would suggest, in medical ethics. It is important to know the basic contours of the field, the key issues, various methodologies and debates that have shaped the field, and the inherited traditions that many of us have learned in our formal educational processes. And yet, each generation coming in the field needs to create new pathways forward for changing times, while also building off or maybe even deviating from that which has come before. Even in those times when it is felt that a move in a radically different direction is needed, one still needs to be acquainted with that which has come before. It is important to generate new ideas for emerging medical, technological, and social challenges that are facing modern healthcare and our contemporary culture. In terms of clinical encounters, the notion of improvisation can help healthcare providers learn and grow with each clinical encounter, because in jazz, if it is really jazz, marked by improvisation, you never play the same song twice. And so every patient encounter is a different encounter, even if it is familiar diagnoses that we're picking up on. The theme of improvisation reminds us of creative possibilities with the patient by listening to the unique perspective and experience of that person in that particular moment in time. Being aware of the nature of improvisation reminds us to be present fully in the moment. It reminds us to be attentive to the needs of one another in the moment and in the space or where we are. So if there are familiar diagnoses or the way people are presenting, that's good, that's helpful for us to know. And yet there still needs to be a kind of listening, because we're not playing simply the same old song. The third motif that I want to highlight for us is this notion of economy of play, or as some would say, call and response. Economy of play is a deep sense of kind of give and take. It is a mutuality that is playful and not begrudging, neither procedural nor merely, okay, now it's your turn to play, I guess, right? This notion is relational and reflects a communal way of life where everyone is invited to be involved. Now, there is not merely a performer on stage, spectators in the audience, and sound engineers controlling technical components. Musicians are often calling out to each other, and those musicians respond. The group calls out to the audience, and they are oftentimes conditioned to respond. The group calls out, the audience then calls back out to the musicians, and then they respond. And so these are moments of mutuality and deep relationality. It requires an economy of generosity marked by community, an idea of trying to call people in instead of calling people out. So how does this musical art, jazz, understood as more than music, generate radical giving within the community? Well, I want to suggest that being aware of the notion of polyphony is important here. Polyphony is the style of simultaneously combining several parts, each forming an individual melody and harmonizing with each other. This notion highlights the importance of multiple voices, multiple melodies, and this is an important, I think, ethical metaphor. Attention to call and response and polyphony helps not only to cultivate the skill of being fully present to one another, but also more fully responsive to marginalized communities when providing healthcare and when these groups are interacting with the healthcare system. It helps providers to step back from the immediate dialogue and events in order to be aware of the larger picture. And so part of being responsible requires a self-reflection, both on how one may be perceived in a context and the actual effects of one's action and decision. And also, I think we can see how important this would be for clinical ethics case consultations, right? That having people from different disciplines, different backgrounds, different viewpoints around the table to lean in and to contribute can help give a better picture of some things that perhaps are missed and to provide greater care for those that we have been charged to serve. Now, I want to say here that each of these three themes, Syncopation, improvisation, and call and response requires a kind of deep listening. And this is something that is often easier said than done, right? As my beloved sometimes reminds me of that, haven't quite mastered that yet, right? But each of these categories, right, requires a deep listening. Now, following thinkers like Alistair McIntyre, I understand a moral practice as an activity in which people work together using specific skills and methods toward a shared goal. Further, the goals, including the habits and dispositional traits necessary for achieving those goals themselves, are considered good for the professional practice and for society at large. Now, before all the ethicists and philosophers in the room object or become a little too indignant with reference to a broad notion of the good, I will, in exasperation with you, say and acknowledge that yes, it is easier said than determined, absolutely. Nevertheless, I take it that medicine is a moral practice with goals, maybe not always well-defined, with some internal values to itself, and the values of medicine interact and intersect with broader sets of social values that can support or be in tension with it in various encounters. Dr. Susan Moore, a Black woman and physician, died from COVID-19 in 2020. She posted an extremely distressing video from her hospital bed describing racist treatment she received by those who were tasked to provide care for her. The concerns she expressed about her condition and testimony as to what she was experiencing in her body as a result of this illness were not taken seriously. And as a result, she continued to experience pain, further deterioration of her bodily systems, and she eventually died. The story of Dr. Susan Moore is just one example, some would argue, of experiences of ethnic minorities in healthcare that can be multiplied many times over. And regardless of the way people approach a case like Dr. Moore, I think one can say without hyperbole, or maybe even only just slight hyperbole, but I don't think it is at all, that inequality is killing us, some of us more than others. A 2003 Institute of Medicine report, Unequal Treatment, Confronting Racial and Ethnic Disparities in Healthcare, painfully and painstakingly detailed the significant health and healthcare gaps between racial and ethnic minorities and their white counterparts. Racial and ethnic minorities have poor health outcomes, experience a lower quality of service when engaging healthcare, receive basic medical procedures at a lesser rate, shorter life experiences, expectancies, and have more significant challenges accessing healthcare, generally speaking, than white Americans. Other researchers have shown how racism and its intersection with class and gender have detrimental health effects. Moreover, they have identified that racism impacts the health of people of color and the delivery of and access to quality care for them, as well as other non-minoritized racial groups of lower socioeconomic status. A legitimate question can be raised here. Where do things stand 2 decades after unequal treatment? Well, according to a prominent participant in the original project, David Williams of Harvard Medical School's School of Public Health, not as much has changed regarding the findings of the report as many had hoped. To be sure, there has been some progress in researchers noting a greater sense of awareness as to how these disparities in health outcomes and healthcare is a problem for the health sector. Yet, after accounting for healthcare access differentials, the severity of diseases and socioeconomic status, these disparities along racialized lines found 20 years earlier, by and large, persist. Now, addressing problems like this in medicine and along these lines is a very tall order, I get it. And even more so when placed in the context of the larger kind of social dynamics that directly and negatively impact health and human well-being. So what is the responsibility of medical schools, clinical ethics training programs, bioethics, and hospital systems in the formation of professionals to address the negative effects of these circumstances on their patients' health outcomes and their ability to deliver quality healthcare to communities of color. Now, some healthcare professionals may think such a question that I'm asking here is misguided, okay? Even if they do lament these conditions, they think the responsibility of addressing them lies outside of their purview and expertise. After all, how can they or you, with the specialized training that you've received, address such large-scale problems that stifle health and human well-being? This simply asks too much of medical professionals. Or maybe it asks too much of them alone. I am convinced that healthcare professionals, training programs, schools, and systems can contribute to addressing this problem. I do think it requires embracing and cultivating a solidarity as a value and a virtue that is a hallmark of social ethics. As a firm commitment to the common good of all people, solidarity calls us to confront inequalities in health outcomes and advocate for those on the margins. While there are systemic dimensions to this work, of course, attention must also be paid to the kind of people we need to be for the solidarity required in this work. And so I want to say here that paying attention to jazz, right? And some of these themes and motifs and understanding it as more than music can perhaps help us embrace a recommitment to the kind of solidarity that is necessary to move towards justice in health and also the delivery of health care. This is a recommitment, a reaffirmation of a kind of solidarity that is a unity among people within a social organization. It is to have a firm commitment to the common good of all people, especially to those on the margins. And so I want to say that we understand the common good as a good for all, not a good for each member of a given society. In this sense, is not to be understood as the greatest good for the greatest number of people. The common good language I'm employing here reflects a broader characteristic of our social world. It points to the material conditions in which people live and how we arrange our social lives that impact how we do life together and the way we bump into each other. Social arrangements, so shaped by policies, laws, and practices, matter with respect to promoting or stifling human flourishing. And so the common good here reflects the degree to which the conditions enable members of a given society to flourish. A commitment to solidarity then is a realization that all inhabitants of this great world house are now and will continue to be neighbors brought into being largely because of various modern and scientific and technological revolutions. Thus, I would suggest that we have obligations to work on behalf of one another. Solidarity requires a deep and radical commitment to those who may be part of, as Howard Thurman said, the diminished, the disinherited, and the disenfranchised, or those whose backs are against the wall. And there are both individual and communal aspects to this notion, and it requires both introspection and action. Individually, solidarity invites us to consider whether our own behaviors and mentalities demonstrate a concern with those on society's margins. Communally, solidarity challenges us to ask whether the social organizations of which we are a part strengthen the bonds of human friendship, especially the bonds between those with and those without sufficient resources here. So the question is, what can jazz, understood as more than a music, how can embracing these ideas of syncopation, improvisation, call and response, and many others that I have not named here, kind of help with this formation? Maybe these reflections from an imperfect art, all that jazz, we may say, can be of help with guiding these processes and navigating uncertain terrain. Considering the problems that we face in these spaces, ways forward are going to require both individual and communal responses within healthcare and outside of it, so that we can reassess our broader values and what we want to act upon. So Maybe attention to syncopation, improvisation, call and response can help us find various pathways towards health justice. Maybe, just maybe, syncopation can help us see the unseen and hear the unheard by paying attention to the margins. Maybe, just maybe, attention to improv can shape our hearts and minds to understand the past in ways so that we can invent a new future. And maybe, just maybe, call and response can inspire us to embed ourselves in a kind of relationality that can lift all of us. Thank you for your time and attention. And now I just want to invite us to maybe riff off of some of this and maybe explore some of these ideas together. Thank you. I don't know if there's, I think we have microphones up front if anyone wants to either push back or maybe make a comment or a question as well. So I really mean it as an invitation to just kind of riff off of some of these ideas. I encourage you not to be shy because you don't want me to pull out other slides, right? It's like, oh, I got more slides, right? Something else I can say. And if not, I will turn it back over to Dr. Rushton here. Don't go away? Okay,
No, no.
fair enough. All right.
So Patrick's really given us a lot to think about. And in a way, a new lens to sort of see our work,
Yeah.
right? And I'm just wondering what you're taking away from today. What's your big takeaway? Love to hear your view. What are you taking away? And if there's anybody in the chat that wants to share anything, what are you thinking away? Oh, great. Okay, go, Matt.
Thank you so much for such a thoughtful presentation. What I'm taking away is this invitation towards really interdisciplinary, interprofessional collaboration in a clinical setting. Do you have any experience with models of places that are doing this, that are attempting to do this, or that are yet doing it well?
Yeah, Matt, I mean, this is a great question. And I would say some of the spaces that I've been in, I think that there are aspirations to do this well, to take this seriously. And also we often miss the mark, right, in terms of fully fulfilling those aspirations. But I would say the best of what I've seen is that if those aspirations are actually put front and center and reminding the committees and these spaces of what we ought to be, then even when we fall short, we have an idea of where it's falling short. So I would just say that in, let me just give two spaces where I have been in terms of contrast, and then there are many other colleagues that I know whose committees and consultation services are functioning, like really well, not perfectly, obviously. It's one of the reasons why I was trying to do this play on reflections from an imperfect art, right? Because in many ways, there's not going to be this kind of perfect approach, right? Everything's going to be stringless, it's going to be messy and marked with some uncertainties and some ambiguities that we have to learn to navigate, right? So, which is why I think some of these motifs or themes in jazz become important for that. So two spots. So let me, the second one is going to be like a hospital kind of ethics system, but I would say in hospice care centers and contexts, those organizations that actually have a dedicated, let's say like ethics office or some resources to, be able to bring people together and for folks to dedicate some of their time to doing ethics work. That space, again, to me, because we can only see from where we sit often, and we hopefully can see through the eyes of others from where they sit based on their testimony, but from where I sit, that space was so enlightening to me. because the whole hospice philosophy of care has this kind of non-hierarchical bent to it that's emphasized, right? Such that it encourages people from various disciplines and backgrounds to be at the table, to really lean in, to trust that inner voice that has been shaped through their profession, through their life experiences, and to not think that it's foolish what's being said or brought to the table just because no one else has said it, or the other folks who we know that are really smart people in the room, right? Those, the folks we think are the really smart people, they're not saying this, so it must not be worth saying, right? So I think in those spaces that takes this hospice philosophy seriously, right? I've seen it work really well where people have been able to draw the insight from one another, to engage in kind of a back and forth discourse, to listen in ways that we perhaps would not be prone to listen to earlier. And also, I would say when I was doing some work at a children's hospital, right, in the ethics service there, again, none of the folks there, right, who directed the office would say that they always do things perfectly. But one of the things that was emphasized over and over and over again was going to be, who are the voices that we need to hear who are not at the table, right? And the voices that we do hear, how is this being framed, right? And we know that the choices that we make in terms of how we tell the story in those ethical contexts are not morally neutral, right? We're making value judgments as to how we narrate the story. What are the kinds of characteristics that emerge just before we get to the ethical problem that we're trying to deal with, that kind of gives a sense that, oh, it's this set of characteristics that are creating some of the ethical challenges and so on and so forth, right? So all that to say, I think that there are a number of places that are thinking along these lines of what I'm trying to say, doing it imperfectly, but part of what I want to convey, I guess, today is that if we can be shaped by some of these ideas and themes that can be found elsewhere as well, right? So it's not just exclusively to this genre of jazz, right? But if we can embrace those as a value and as a internal disposition, how would it kind of orient us to these spaces? And that's the kind of thing that I wanted to leave us with today. So.
Hi, thanks for the talk.
Great.
Question if in addition to the kind of theoretical framework that you use as a parallel, if there's any opportunities you see for actual music making in the space. I know there's a music therapist here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, great. Can you say a little bit more about what you have in mind here? And I would love to riff off of you in that regard.
Yeah, please. Yeah. I guess I'm familiar with one of the music therapists here is Carrie Devlin, and she does work sometimes with like the healthcare providers after a significant event. And I could imagine a sphere where, I don't know, there's some conflict or a difficult decision to be made. It seems a little out there to actually invoke a musical experience, but I don't know if that's ever been considered.
Yeah, no. Well, no, whether or not it's ever been considered, I think that probably, I probably couldn't answer that because of the limitation of my scope, right? And I will say this though, I think it's something interesting about why, even though it may be out there, as you say, right, in certain spaces, it may not be out there with regard to a pathway forward. And the reason why I say that is because, as many others would say, music has always had a kind of unifying aspect to it, right? There are ways in which music can engage in a kind of semi-transcendence, right? Bringing people kind of above certain types of circumstances and drawing them into this kind of rhythm of life, and right, given the physical nature of sound and questions of like resonance and those kinds of things. Actually, I don't think it's really far-fetched to think about it that way. I think it would be a challenge for some of our spaces to incorporate some of that, right? It's like, this is weird, this is awkward, right? Why are we doing this kind of stuff, right? But I do think there are places and systems that are taking this question of like arts in medicine seriously. So I'm working with a number of folks and some organizations who are focused on arts and medicine, arts and health, that do music therapy, not only for patients, but also find ways to help staff as they're dealing and with the challenges of trying to provide quality healthcare. I mean, which is hard, right? I mean, as healthcare professionals, you all have to deal with some very heavy issues, oftentimes under-resourced, pinched for time, and all these different kinds of things. And so I do know some of these offices that deal with arts and medicine, or they have music therapy or arts therapy, right, can play a very a beneficial role. And there's this interesting movement, right, that's afoot. You see in places like New Zealand, Australia, other places in the UK, and it's slowly being talked about and incorporated in various aspects of the United States of what some would call like social prescribing. And it sounds kind of weird, but really it's this idea of just how the arts can be used to help generate a kind of social engagement with the world that actually has positive health outcomes on people. And so it's partially to deal with the kind of isolation that people are feeling, and also a kind of over medicalization. So some people are concerned that we're maybe medicalizing social problems in a way that there may be other avenues or mechanisms to actually promote someone's well-being and health apart from, you know, just prescribing medicine. And so there are interesting movements that are happening. I'm thinking about some of the work that's happening in New York, where there are conversations with city officials as well about how to fund and incorporate some of this in the larger infrastructure. And so many people now are trying to ask or think about the ethics of social prescribing, right? Making sure that if you do something or engage in this kind of work, how do we keep it to try to attain the ends without engaging in some inadvertent negative consequences that we want to avoid. So I'm not sure if that
Right, yeah.
speaks to your question, but as they say, that's all I got.
No, thank you. Thank you.
Great, wonderful. I'll make you short so that we're at 1 o'clock.
Great, thank you so much for the talk. I'm Chet Hodgeberg. I'm a former jazz musician and now intensive care unit doctor. So this
Wonderful.
resonated deeply with me. One thing I was reflecting on is if you had any comments on how to prepare trainees to engage with improvisation. It's on my best days, I find that it's one of the most important things I'm able to bring to the table.
Yeah.
But I recognize that in my medical training and my trainees training, it's often de-emphasized. They're not supposed to make mistakes, or they're supposed to know the right answer and get there efficiently. Any thoughts on training?
Yeah, so part of, and I'll say this as briefly as I can, and perhaps we could pick it up afterwards if you had a few moments. Yeah, I mean, I think there's something really important about that. And this is one of the areas that a lot of people say improv, oh, that sounds a little too loosey-goosey, right? We need tight structures. We need a kind of standardized way of doing this because it's going to get all over the place and it's just going to create problems. And one aspect of this is notion of like tradition and freedom, right? So I tried to emphasize that. So there are some boundaries that kind of guide us and thinking ways forward. And also we have to allow for creative judgments to be made. And here's the thing, we're already doing that, right? We do it all the time in the sense that we think, well, we have this standard procedure that you put the data in and we always get the right judgment or conclusion. Well, many of us, if we've been doing this long enough, whether it be making diagnoses or ethical judgments, right? It's not quite that formulaic, right? And so I think the idea is to say, how can improv help us just be aware of what it is that we're already doing, and then recognize that we are navigating these spaces imperfectly. And I think acknowledging that has a way of helping us be better at what it is that we do. So I do think we need to find ways in our training and other way to incorporate that, whether it be having somebody who teaches improv come in to do things. If we can figure out how to wedge in a medical curriculum, which is, I know it's a pipe dream, right? But something along that line, or at least something that's co-curricular as well. But I do think that is important. And my time is done. So I want to say thank you so very much for your time and attention.
Family, we thank you for being here today as well. And I want to thank Dr. Smith. I think he's given us some interesting roadmaps to leave with. The value of listening. the importance of narrative, how we can use our wisdom to improvise in uncertainty and ambiguity, and how we can create a different kind of community for us to all be whole in the midst of. So thank you for being here, and we look forward to seeing you next month. Thank you.